Hey, everybody, and thanks for listening to Starting a Record Label. This is a podcast where I, Joshua Smith, slowly but surely start a record label. Eventually. I actually got all my stuff back this week for the LLC. It's in full swing, so that's been great. But we'll talk about that probably more next week. This week, I ran into a guy named Jason Zeimet, and he actually knows a ton about the legacy of Tooth and Nail Records. He also produced this documentary called Pick It Up, Ska in the 90s, that includes like Tim Armstrong from Op Ivy and Rancid, John Feldman of Goldfinger, and Tony Hawk, and just a ton of like crazy people and information about like ska and why it blew up in the 90s. You can pick it up at skamovie.com in Blu-ray and even VHS form, and you can actually stream it on Amazon Prime or Vimeo. But anyway, we talk about how he kind of dislikes streaming and why he loves physical media and how he runs his record label, Unoriginal Vinyl. He's pressed vinyl for MXPX, Slick Shoes, Stavesacre, Kenny Wayne Shepherd even, and we talk about how he's not even spent a penny of his own money on this. So it was a great talk, super knowledgeable guy, super nice dude. I'm glad that I ran into him. So anyway, if you guys could do me a favor, Spotify and all these other podcasting apps, they don't do a really good job of promoting any podcasts. That's pretty much up to us. So if you guys could use any of your podcasting apps and just search us thing and hit subscribe and add it to your list, it goes a long way to help us actually reach people that'd be interested in the podcast. Also, if you guys are interested in being on the actual record label, head on over to nottodayrobot.com and just plug in all your information and I'll give you a shout. But without further ado, Jason Zeimet. This whole podcast is kind of like leading me to start a record label. And I'm like, I need to get more information about pressing plants, what's the best. I'm actually talking to Ashley from duplication.ca, which is like a cassette duplication place this week. And it was crazy to hear some places that I thought might be really, really good pressing plants that, I've heard people work with for years aren't. And some places that I thought was just going to be a hole in the wall because of their website and everything else are actually the best pressing plants on earth. So it was just kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, you can fire up your podcast whenever you want. We can just chat and do whatever you want.
Well, I already hit record here. I edit it all later. So
sweet. All right. I'm Jason Zeimet, and I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I started a little label called Unoriginal Vinyl. It's a vinyl-specific reissue company, but I also work with independent artists who want to get their material put out on vinyl, but they don't really know how to produce something on vinyl. So I help them with either packaging, layout, and design, or sometimes in the cases of artists who have come from a bygone era but don't really understand licensing and how their music is owned, who it's owned by, and how to get in touch with them. I sort of act as an intermediate between major labels and sort of publishing owners. And I just help artists sometimes get their catalogs back. Sometimes I work with artists to put out a reissue that the artists couldn't afford with their own money to reissue. And I'll find a label. I guess I'm just very good at finding money and not spending any of my own money. I've got a lot of friends who own record labels who you treat it as like a passion project, but what it ends up becoming is like a money pit.
Yes.
When you get 5-6 bands down the road, and with vinyl or physical media releases, it only takes 1 or 2 records to fail to put yourself completely in the black, in the red.
Yeah.
What's the term? Yeah. So I stay away from all that, and I've managed to just do this whole thing for artists. I'm a representative of artists and what their vision is, but I'm kind of I work with a guy in Switzerland, and he and I work to achieve what the artist's visions are for their packaging. Sometimes it's new packaging, brand new out of the box, and sometimes it's restoring packaging from previous works that doesn't have any artwork that exists anymore.
Yeah.
So
one of the, I listened to your podcast that was on labeled the Tooth and Nail podcast, and you talked about the Speakeasy album. It kind of blows my mind. Stavesacre's Speakeasy album blows my mind that there isn't any artwork from that still. Like you said, it's just gone.
It's gone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I sort of hold on to so dearly about these physical catalog titles and holding things, physically in my hands is that it's sort of the only version of the truth that I'll believe. I'm a big fan of MTV's State. Do you know that show? Have you heard of that?
No, I've never seen it.
It's like a sketch comedy show from the 90s, and a lot of the guys went on to make like Reno 911 and a bunch of sketch comedy TV series much later in life. But when it first debuted in the 90s, it had a bunch of royalty-free. They didn't have to pay licensing fees to major labels to put on famous grunge songs, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all these types of things. And so the vision I have in my head of watching The State as a kid on TV, on MTV, is that Cannonball by the Breeders belongs on this sketch. And then over the course of 20 years, through acquisition and licensing and changes that happen in ownership of Cannonball by the Breeders, that song goes away as a sort of crucial linchpin of that, what makes that sketch funny.
Yeah.
And so I see licensing of music kind of the same way. It's like if for some reason publishing gets weird on a record, you'll see on Spotify or on Apple Music complete albums that are missing tracks, complete albums that are, discographies from bands that are incomplete. And if I can hold something in my hand and say, this is like, this is what this record is supposed to be. It comes from 1990, whatever it is, 1997 Bouncing Souls. And at that time, they had the licensing for that one cover song. And that's part of the record. And then it goes away through licensing. That feels like an incomplete piece of the puzzle to me.
That's always worried me with licensing, whether it be movies or even video games, to where things are all going streaming, all going online. You're like, oh, this one movie, and and it could literally be erased from history.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, where's it at, and who owns the rights to that? A nerdy one that my wife loves, because my wife loves Dolly Parton. There's a TV movie from like the 80s that they even put on I think it's Rocky Mountain Christmas or something like that. But no one could find it anywhere. The only place that I could find it is actually had to scour eBay for a VHS copy of the darn thing.
Yeah.
So
there's a bit of a challenge in sort of like, I hope I never move. I hope I never have to shift all this garbage to another home or something like that. But I'm at a phase in life right now where I've been married for 15 years. We've got a 5-year-old. We're sort of domesticated in this spot in South Denver for a long time. And for my daughter, who's 5, to be able to pick up a record and absorb it the way that I like to, and put on the record and know how to physically play it and stuff like that. It's not just constant toys coming at her. It's like already starting to cultivate her own taste based on looking at art instead of just like, oh, I like that song, I'm going to add it to my Amazon Music's favorite playlist.
Yeah.
And then it could go away. And you don't even know that it goes away half the time. So even my digital library of music is stuff that I'll own. I'm not going to I don't have any streaming devices or anything like that. So I guess I'm old fashioned in that way, but there's a mentality behind that old fashionedness to where the preservation of history is sort of at my fingertips. I like that. And
the fact that it could never be taken away from you. And, I know my daughter, even I listen to Spotify quite a bit, but my daughter is just devouring like early 2000s pop punk, which is hilarious.
How old's your daughter?
13.
Sweet.
And she loves it, but there was something about like having the album, having the artwork, just scouring it. And even back then, we didn't get most of our stuff off the internet. Weird enough, though, we did find out who MXPX was over the internet, which is kind of weird, like early, like 1995. But everything else was like mail order. Everything was like, oh, this album, or you'd read the liner notes at the end and be like, hey, we think these bands that we toured with, and like, oh, Slick Shoes, oh, this or that. Okay, we'll look up those guys. Or they would just pop up in the Christian bookstore because we were into the Christian pop punk scene, the Tooth and Nail stuff and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. But I want your experience to hold some weight. Like I want those stories and those memories to be illuminated by the thing you hold in your hand when you show your 13-year-old daughter that record, that Slick Shoes record or whatever. You're going to hand it to them, and and they're going to look at it and they're going to understand everything there was to know about Slick Shoes from 1998, as opposed to if somebody else got their hands on it. Let's just say the people who own that record, Universal Records, some dude who's like an intern who is 22 years old, who wasn't born when Slick Shoes Burnout came out, is now like, this digital record is tossed on his proverbial desk and told, make vinyl packaging for this.
Yeah.
And he just goes,
okay,
I don't know. Just look at a Google image search and it's pixelated, and I'm going to just take that photo and slap it on Photoshop and an art template and hit send at the printers at the vinyl. And so you see a lot of really, really shitty reissues.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I've heard some really bad things, specifically about a couple of the Tooth and Nail ones, to where like they were just pixelated awful. I'm like, why would you do that? I mean, even in the 90s, like I remember the one time that I screwed up. I was working with a band and I was like, okay, we'll get these stickers done. And it was like at the beginning of sending stuff over the internet to somebody, and the stickers came back just awful. And I'm like, what resolution?
Right?
And that's just a sticker,
Yeah,
like, we're talking like an album,
12 by 12, 13 by 13 images.
I mean, you probably do better if you just scanned it yourself, took it out of the jewel case,
Well, so we do that. Like, sometimes we have to do that because that's the only way, and we just restore step by step every single, like every single trick you can pull out to restore artwork is just employed here by us. And what that gives you in the long run is a lot more freedom to work with artists that you want to work with. Or they come to you and say, hey, I got your name from so-and-so. We've been chasing this license for this record we have put out in 1997 or in 2007. And we hear you can work some magic with it. And so I do. And they are very happy with the end result, and I don't really take much of a fee. And it's got like a production stamp on it more than it is like a record label. There's things that I've put out that have been paid for by other people through like Kickstarter. I did a movie last year or 2 years ago that was all about ska music called Pick It Up, ska in the 90s.
I've heard about that. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and spent a lot of time working with all the bands to get their music to contribute to the compilation. But at the end of the day, like, the whatever $8,000 or whatever it cost to press the records was paid for by the crowdfunding stuff. So
how hard is it to get a hold of labels that actually have the licenses to that? Because I've heard things about Five Iron's earlier records that have been sold off to who knows who right now, and them having a problem a little bit with dealing on getting those approved.
Would you like to? Okay, the first answer to your question is it's very hard. But as you know, when you're working with a bunch of different artists and everything like that, it's just sort of a network that balloons little spores at a time. You know what I mean? Like, you get an offshoot, and then this tour manager for these 9 bands, he becomes recommending you to this tour manager or this business manager. And with the majors, they're so consolidated now, there's probably only 4 vinyl licensing people at every major label. So
crazy. So they all know each other.
I mean, I can get in touch with them, but this has been 5, 6, 7 years of research, like constant working with all of these different people to make these connections so that eventually I can make the big ask of like 10 titles at a time from Universal for Record Store Day. Things like that are not tooth and nail. That's just like a pocket, a window of stuff that I'm doing right now. But the goal is to do much more broad releases than that in the long run. And for Five Iron, when they did their Kickstarter, they bought their entire catalog back. So they own all of their catalog, and now they can license vinyl releases to whomever the highest bidder is, and they get all the profits from it. So they are their own record label. They will release at from here until forever, they will self-release everything that they own. And if they have a weird one-off, like it's just the same as like a t-shirt vendor wanting to make t-shirts at Five Iron. That's what a vinyl company soliciting their music for a vinyl release is basically like. Can we use your logo on our t-shirt? Can we put out your record on vinyl? And Five Iron will say yay or nay, depending on how, what's in it for them, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was kind of a weird thing that happened when that was probably 2012 when they decided to come back, and they just out of the gate they're like, we'll do a Kickstarter for like $10,000 or something like that, and raise like $250,000. It was just insane.
Yeah, You couldn't believe that. Truly couldn't believe that. I produce a podcast called Magnified Podcast, and they deep dive every single 5-iron album and interview all the band members and stuff like that. So you should check that out if you haven't heard that. That's fun because I'm that deep in the well with that band. I've got every 5-iron record plus every, like extraneous test pressing and stuff with alternate art. Every album you can imagine that they've ever put out, I make, alternate versions of the covers with them, and that's the quantity is job one. But I've got one. This is funny. Did you listen to 5-Iron Frenzy 2 Electric Boogaloo ever?
That was one I didn't get too much into.
Right. So that's the Power Rangers.
I
on
see.
The cover
That's
of that.
awesome. That's crazy.
Yeah. So I'm pretty deep in the well with all that stuff. But the bottom line is, this is a hobby. I don't want to be controlled by it in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to deal with the headaches of owning my own distribution shop to get these records mailed out to people. A lot of the guys that dive in full body submersion into owning their own record label, they don't think about the liabilities of time. And when you're a dad, the time that it costs you to pack every single record that you sell, to ship every single record that you sell, to deal with returns on every single record you sell, but more importantly, all the taxes that you have to deal with on the back end. When you're talking about a profit, especially physical media releases, if your band is hot, you can make a decent amount of money on the streaming, but the taxes on streaming are a pain in the ass. But the physical releases, you're talking about per record, maybe a $5 profit per record. You make 500 copies. 500 copies these days for a popular band, like a really popular band, is still a lot of vinyl to sell. It's surprising. But you have to be a fan of the band. You have to not be satiated with the streaming service access you have to their catalog. You need to want more than just that. And then so you create physical media for them. Are there 500 people out there in the world who love One Republic, the band from LA? Like, yes. Are there 500 vinyl people who love One Republic enough to want not just everything they own digitally, but their physical releases? You start to get into like a weird, dicey territory. It doesn't seem like it makes sense, but when you get into these pockets of indie fans and nerds and physical media guys like me, there are 500 people out there who will want hardcore Zayo record from 1999 or whatever on vinyl. There are, but it's always a gamble. And when you're talking $5 profit per unit, 500 times 5 is $2,500. Back out 40% for taxes. So for that release that you've spent your blood, sweat, and tears on, and then you're mailing everything, you have to pay for mailers, all that stuff. If you're just talking the economics of it, you're maybe walking away with half of $2,500 when you take out taxes at 40 and mailers and returns and overages or underages from the pressing plants and all the stuff you have to deal with logistically from them that you don't factor into your cost of goods. You don't factor in freight of shipping 500 records to your house. It's another $500 to $1,000.
Or when they go bad, or something gets messed up in the mail, I send another one out, then you're negative at that point.
Oh yeah. So that's like, not to stamp on anybody's dreams of owning a record label, but like, these are the things that I considered dearly before saying, which direction do I want to head with this? Do I want to make this fun and make it awesome and get to work with these artists that I love? Because that, for most record label owners, is the dream, right? You get to collaborate with artists who you admire and respect, and then you want to see them take whatever success or visibility or acknowledgement from the community at large that they have, and you, because of something you did, you increased it. You made people more aware of the Mike Herrera brand because you designed a 10-inch record for him and people all love it or whatever, you're increasing the brand awareness, and I get to net the benefits of all of that without any of the liabilities. Mike Herrera and his team can pay for that pressing. I just send them the bill after I've done everything. You know what I mean? And they're thrilled.
It's pretty brilliant, man.
So, I'm sort of your podcast is about starting a record label, but I'm sort of the pirate out in the water saying, come join me. It's more fun. It's safer out here. The water is mild. But a lot of people are just like, no, I'm going to build the biggest, baddest boat, and I'm going to go out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where the water's the choppiest. And I'm like, island man. Let's go to the like Bahamas and just cruise with some rum in hand.
But like my idea of starting a record label is going to be different than what most people's is. My whole focus, even though like I love the actual physical media aspect of it, I just don't see that as a way to raise enough money. And so I think that to focus more on streaming and actually cultivating an audience online, a lot more digital video, as much as, you figure where you work, where things work best. And just having the band doing a lot more than just recording and releasing music. Being out here in LA and seeing bands, they'll record something and then they might do a music video for it. And then that's it. Like they'll record a whole either EP or LP, and then they'll just drop it all one day, and then nothing from them for like a year. So it's just kind of this whole digital realm right now. They really want something like once a month. They need something. Even the algorithms at Spotify would rather you drop out a single once a month than they would actually, here's one an LP, once a year. So
yeah. So
it's going to be more focused on
I didn't get to
that.
the end of I was listening to your episode when you were talking about naming your record label. I didn't get to the end of it though. Did you end up naming your record label?
Oh yeah. It's called Not Today Robot. So
Not Today Robot. Tell me about that. I have a robot as my logo as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, being in the music industry, you see some of the process of some of these major labels, and I've even been in a lot of songwriting sessions to where it's just a machine. It's like a stamp, move the next thing forward, to where someone will be a top line right, just come in, they'll get a beat from someone else. Who knows who this beat came from, and so they'll come over and they'll just sing melodies over it for like 2 hours straight until they chop something up, or we put something together to where like that sounds like a nice melody, and then they'll move it on to somebody else. And so you got people that are doing lyrics, and it'll just get passed back and forth.
It feels to you
really
like
cool.
it feels to you like it's just like a working mechanical belt going from
absolutely
assembly line to the other.
Just writing to even releases to where the band operates, it seems more, or the label operates, it just seems so robotic. It does not have the feeling left in it. Like the stuff that we, the way that Tooth and Nail was earlier, the way they actually were, it was kind of passion projects almost for them, to where they weren't making probably a lot of money at the very beginning of it,
Right. I feel exactly like you do about it, where it's very mechanized. So this is like the logo for Unoriginal Vinyl. This is like
nice.
a hand carved wood sign. That a buddy in Texas made for me, but it's the same idea. It's like, here's the system, here's what works for people to own a record label, and here's sort of like what I see about that. Like, you have to bust out of that norm and think outside the box. So that's the logo.
I love it.
That's the idea. It's similar. It's like everything's assembly line and cookie cutter and mechanized. And why are we doing it this way? You know what I mean? Especially owning a record label these days, it's a crazy endeavor. And I'm not a big proponent of, like, I guess I should say I'm a proponent of it, but I'm not a participant of social media at all. Like, I'm not. If you look at, I have a guy in Carolina who runs a Facebook for Unoriginal Vinyl and the Instagram and everything like that, but that stuff's not of crucial interest to me.
I tried. I was like, he's probably on Facebook or something. I'll add him on there so I can talk to him at some point in time. And I was like, oh, no, you're not on there.
No, sir. No. And I'm not going to be. I'm just like, I'm for 5 years, it was like the great time passer. You know what I mean? And I got like tired of being unproductive in my own life creatively. Yeah. I was just sitting in a swamp of not productivity. The moment I got rid of all of it, it was like, oh, well, I've got all these ideas now that I can actually spend time, I've dedicated time to, and they're doing better and better every day. You know what I mean? So that's exciting.
But at the same time, like, you're doing podcasts and, you're getting to people. So it's not necessarily that you're 100% away from, like, digital media, because I don't see it
not
just
at
as,
all.
like,
No,
Facebook
it's just a lot of noise. Like the social media, like my network is through calling guys usually, or getting in touch, or somebody reaches out to me and I get wind of it, and then I'm like, let's get on the freaking phone right now and talk about this. Like you and I are doing. You and I don't know each other, but this is how it all starts. It's the genesis of a lot of ideas for me, and me liking 1,000 posts a day, or hoping and wishing for 1,000 likes on my social media or whatever. Like, I don't give a shit about any of it. It's like, if I feel like posting a video of a record spinning or something like that, like, there was a time where that was really permanent. It was like I had 1 million posts or whatever on the Instagram, and then I just completely gutted everything, just rebranded, and just now it's clean and simple, and I'm productive so much more, and I can branch out into many different conversations, making a movie, making a record. It doesn't matter. It's just creativity to me. I love it. That's
cool. Yeah. I definitely, for the label, I definitely kind of idolize like the Brandon Ebbles or Larry Livermore from Lookout, or even for people who do movies and television and nerd stuff, Kevin Smith. Like those underdogs, the people that, weren't at these giant labels or giant movie, companies or whatever else, the people that, have all their heart still left in it. So it's just, it's something I really want to move forward with.
There's a lot of business and commerce that can get muddy and muddy up your sort of like vision. But the three people you just named have an impulse that they can't ever stop creating. It's just within their bloodstream to create. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's always like with almost like a narrow scope view of like, I'm going to create. Whether or not people follow along on the train or they're interested in what I'm doing, it's not going to stop the course that I have. And I'm on this course to create. And as I create, it will beget more creation of other things, or it will inspire new creations towards other things that I didn't know I'd be interested in. I had a web series that I did for 10 plus years where I traveled all over the country and interviewed complete strangers about their interesting museums or hobbies or whatever. And it would lead me into walking around a warehouse with Fat Mike from NoFX. But then the next day it would lead me to meeting a guy who owned a toilet seat museum. Like it was all the same to me, and it was all just telling a story and having something as a slice of life to remember that period of my life where I was traveling and like nonstop constantly. And so, it morphs, the vision morphs, and then you kind of evolve with it, but the creativity never stops. You have to keep creating. So
that's, I was in bands earlier, and that's a lot of creativity that, I just don't have the time for. I feel like at least with a label, like I can, work with other bands, produce other bands, but like having, going through hundreds and hundreds of songs, just trying to find a good one. I just don't have that time for anymore.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I felt the exact same way you do right now in your seat. I know exactly what that feeling feels like. It's kind of stifling. And I realized at that moment, it was like it dawned on me, like, so what are the things that are inhibiting my time? Well, I have a baby. That's impossible. I have after school activities and stuff like that. But before your phone analyzed the amount of time you spent looking at your screen and stuff like that, I had that sort of like moment of, oh, well, there's one thing that I can completely get rid of out of my time. And devote my time towards something else. And there's always a fine line, because my wife is the opposite, right? She wants to unwind and relax and turn off her brain and get a little bit of like a recharge from being on social media or on her phone or something like that. That's her peaceful time and stuff like that. My most peaceful time is when I'm creating something. Yeah. However ridiculous it is. So
I'm a little bit the same way. I got rid of video games probably when I had my first child. She's, obviously 13 now. So like, I just, when I was younger, I'd like absorb video games, and it was like, you know what? I just don't have time for this. Like there's a new one out every year. I just don't even, like a couple of years ago, somebody gave me like $100 Best Buy card, and I was like, maybe I'll, get the new Zelda game, But no, I was like, you know what? I'll get something for my kids. And so I got them like a video game to play, just so that, they could play around with every once in a while. I can't spend my time on that anymore. I feel like it's a waste.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got a good idea in your hands of what you want to do and how you want to create that. What's the deal with like the artists that you're finding?
Yeah, to try to like convince the artists is my next step. I've got a handful that I want to reach out to, and it's just I feel like artists in general don't want to do a lot of social media, and they want to do what has always been done, to where like, oh, label gives them X amount of money, then they, go to a, producer, and then they release it and that's it. Or they want to tour a little bit, which obviously nowadays is way harder to do. But I think that things have moved in a different direction nowadays, with especially if you take a look at a lot of these younger rappers and whatnot that have kind of blown up online. And I think that they have a better print to follow, as opposed to any of the younger rock musicians, because that's kind of near and dear to my heart.
Sure.
It's going to be trying to get trying to work with them and trying to convince them that we need to do a lot more than just release music once a year.
Yeah. So
but
you have
at the same time, I want to
mind.
kind of get that feel. That band's in mind, absolutely. But at the same time, like I want to try to I want to take that feeling of what we had when we were younger, with being connected to the music, and kind of trying to use that nowadays with the way that social media works and Spotify and everything else. And that's kind of a hard thing for me to kind of cross together.
Do you think it's possible for younger generations to quite understand because a lot of what you and I experienced with a tooth and nail church youth group culture growing up was you had this strong emotional reaction to something because you were sitting there watching these bands play, and you watched them over the course of a few tours go from a 25 attendant audience to 200 attendant audience to et cetera. And it sort of evolved organically that way. And you evolved and you grew up with them and your friends having the feeling of like salt on your lips from dancing in the pit and sweating it out and all that stuff. And that's not to say that kids don't have those experiences today. I don't know what they look like. You know what I mean? I'm a little disconnected from that. I understand there's like huge EDM culture and huge Coachella culture that circles and centers around sort of just like this really bouncy, effervescent kind of music and stuff like that. And kids are having those positive endorphins released at big festivals and stuff like that. But I'm disconnected. So I've had a few guys come to me and say, I want to start a record label. I want to do this. And I'm like, well, what's your connection to the music of the 15-year-old kid today? You know what I mean? Do you feel like your connection to your daughter allows you to see some of that? Or is she experiencing music the same way that we did when we were growing up by going to shows all the time? Or is she just like, I have a Spotify favorites playlist and it mostly sounds like the Harry Styles new record or whatever?
She definitely devours new music that she loves. And I think I'm in a bunch of, Facebook groups online. Some of them can be like horrible pits of despair, but the younger crowd kind of are in all these groups, and you can see them, like certain kinds of people, exactly like we were. They're even buying vinyl and whatnot of their favorite albums of these, I would say, smaller bands, even though they're getting quite large right now. Bands like Knuckle Puck and things like that, to where I really think that it can work, like 100%. And I think that younger kids are kind of starved for that too, especially now with the COVID thing. Nobody's been able to get out. At some point in time in the future, that will be reversed. But and they'll be able to get out and travel a little bit more and go to shows a little bit more. But I do think that they definitely yearn for that kind of same feeling that we had, whether, looking at the album, listening to the album, having the artwork, even because they purchased that stuff. Whether or not they're listening to it, who knows? Right. But they want that.
Yeah. We're at an interesting time in history, I think, with youth culture, where when they come out of COVID, when the kids who graduated high school who didn't get to have the traditional childhood version of graduating and things like that, they didn't have a graduation ceremony, they didn't have a prom, they didn't have any of this, are going to be going one of two ways. They're going to be going really inward, which I consider social media to be. It's like a bunch of people inside their own heads, living in their own headspace, looking for affirmation for other people who are like-minded as they are. Or you're going to have that 10% of kids who just get like, they're pent up, they're frustrated. The social justice movements of the world are a little above their head, if that makes sense, in terms of them getting out. So you're going to get to that point where like you're going to see kids throwing up DIY shows all the time. And that exists in especially Southern Los Angeles with the ska-core culture, the Hispanic ska-core punk scene that exists. People are doing backyard shows to this day all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But that will become visible again to the mainstream because people will be looking for that release that kids are only capable of doing with no life experience and with nothing to lose and with a bunch of naivete. They're going to, electrocute themselves with their own handmade generators that they saved all their money up, pulled $250 to buy a generator from Lowe's. And they're going to start throwing shows up in pool halls and VFWs like we did when we were kids.
Yeah.
Because
like go to Cornerstone, there was a million small little concert things outside people's trucks,
Yeah, so. Generator stage shows like we used to play at Cornerstone. Totally. We did the same thing. We played all those shows. But I feel like there's a particular moment in history right now where you have, if you're tapped into it or your daughter's tapped into it and she's going to these shows, you get exposure to the idea that that culture, there's always a need for that culture, but especially now when people are burnt out, like there's only so much friggin' time and energy you can spend here without just being like, I'm over it, man. Like, let's get out and feel the adrenaline of pushing into another 18-year-old kid, whatever, 13-year-old kid listening to fast, angry music. Cause there's going to be a lot of angry people out there. And this is going to be their release in a healthy way.
And I think I think they're starved for that. I think they're starved for, not only contact with other people, but the kind of music and that kind of, experience. Well.
But you have to find a way to communicate that. You know what I mean? That's what Tooth and Nail did. That's what Lookout did. They took all of these things. Lookout did it in the late 80s. Tooth and Nail did it in the late 90s. Nobody did it in the late, maybe like No Sleep Records did a little bit in the late 2000s and the aughts with like La Dispute and those types of bands. But we're at that, that the bell curve is going to hit the apex here soon with people just going like, give me something interesting and different and angry and aggressive and raw sounding, because like there's only so much like perfectly on top of the beat EDM music that you can listen to before you're just like, I gotta have something else. Like
even working in the recording industry, like the rock's the same way to where like they chop it up all to crap,
Right.
And I've done that for so long for artists. And I was like, what, when I started producing stuff 10 years ago, I was I'm not going to do that. Like it's just for stuff that I work with. So, that's part of the robot aspect too, to where like, I like working with analog tape and other things that kind of force you not to do that.
Right.
I'm also digital, but
you got to do the kid thing, the younger culture thing, because the guys who are in their 30s now trying to make it in bands and stuff like that, they've got a completely different reason for being in a band. They know what it takes. Well, they know what it takes to either make it or not. And they're going to start a band in their 30s or still be in a band in their 30s, 4 years strong. Like, why are they still a band? They're great. But why are they still making music? They've got a completely different agenda than to just like feel the rush.
Yeah. That audience is still there though, which is kind of crazy.
Totally. Yeah. And that's great. But that audience is now 25 years old. Yeah. They're not 18 anymore or 16 anymore. And so, I mean, in my opinion, if you're going to start a label and you want to look for bands, it's looking to that culture to find your next big thing. That's all that any of those other guys did. They plucked Billy Joe Armstrong out of obscurity.
Yep.
And he starts Sweet Children because he's just at all the shows all the time. He's going to all these punk rock shows. He starts Sweet Children and the rest is Green Day history.
Yeah.
Brandon Evil's no different. You know what I mean? Like they're all doing that thing where they're not looking towards the bands who have a really solid business plan. They're looking for the kids who have nothing to lose. So that would
I've talked about that with a few people. Like, I'm not looking for bands that are even great writers. I'm looking for bands that are going to be 100 and 200% into this, so
yeah, they got nothing to lose. Like this is it for them.
You can always work on those things too, whether it's songwriting or, your tone or whatever it is, you as a band being live, that's always something you got to work on. So,
right. Yeah. So I wish you luck in that endeavor.
Well, thank you. And thanks for coming on, man. It was kind of crazy. Like we just chatted up on Instagram, like, oh, weird. All right. Yeah, dude, have you on the podcast. I need more people.
Why not? I don't know who's going to hear it. Doesn't matter to me. Again, it's all part of the creative process. And if I can find other creative types in the world out there that have one listener or 200 listeners or 10,000 listeners or 200,000 listeners. I don't give a shit. It's just good for the brain to exercise those muscles and do it as much as you possibly can. And do it in real time. That's also another thing for me. It's like, let's just do it in real time because it's the real deal. Like it's the genuine thing. And maybe something you said or I said today will inspire either of us to go create more and say, oh, I really want to get focused on this part of my operating plan. Yeah. And so you inspire me just as much.
Well, thanks, man.
With what you're doing.
Is there, you got anything coming up recently that you want to shout out to? Or?
Well, we're in June of 2020, coming out of the COVID stuff with all the pressing plants now up and operating. I would say that I have 8 releases scheduled for the next month.
Nice.
And I'd say you've heard of at least 6 of the 8. Very, very, you'll know who they are and what they are. And
I would definitely know. I would buy right now if you had Dogwood Building a Better Me on LP.
So the funny thing about that one, I will tell you that story. That's owned by a major, Universal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tooth and Nail's entire catalog is owned by a major. Through Thick and Thin is not. They were on Rescue Records when that got put out, so I can put that out tomorrow. I know Josh real well, so he's given it to me to put out if I want to. The artwork for Building a Better Me is fantastic. Mm-hmm. But the song selection on that record is about 6 solid, perfect songs. Mm-hmm. And then filler for the rest. So what if, this is just an idea I'm going to spitball at you, what if I did the artwork for Building a Better Me, but I turned it around and made it the artwork for Reversed and Forward Again, which is like the best of Dogwood, the greatest hits of Dogwood, like a compilation of all their best tracks from all their records, because they put out a prolific amount of tunes, but the amount of people who know Dogwood's catalog, again, is there 500 people out there who love vinyl enough and Dogwood enough who still remember that, who want to buy that one record? Or would they just want a best of, like the Spotify playlist of best Dogwood songs? Yeah. I'm leaning towards the best of. Yeah. So they put out a compilation called Reversed and Forward Again in the late 2000s, which had the worst artwork you've ever seen in your entire life. Yeah. They looked slapdash together. It was a joke. But the Building a Better Me artwork was flawless in its execution. So what if I did Building a Better Me's artwork, but changed it to not say Building a Better Me, changed it to the best of Dogwood, and made. I mean, I love a lot of the other Dogwood albums and whatnot. So if you did a best of, I'd probably be interested in that. But for some odd reason, the Building a Better Me album was like a cultivation of kind of like their progress at the time, and it just sealed in my heart at the time, and in all my friends' heart at the time, like my love for Dogwood. I don't know why, but I agree. I'd be interested in both, to be honest. Yeah. When they came out 2-3 years ago. They were toured with they didn't tour, but they were on a couple of dates with 5 Iron out here. Yep. I was like, I got to get it. I got to be here. And you were there. Yep. Sweet. That was MXPX and 5 Iron and Dogwood, right? Yep. Yeah, that was a good one. I love that poster with Anchorman. Did you see that one? The San Diego poster yes. That's a good one. I have that on my wall, I think, somewhere. Yeah, I'm on the fence on Dogwood just because there are a lot of people like you and me out there who have significant memories about that band. I understand it's small though, because even with those early records, they didn't press a lot of those. And I don't know if they're vinyl people. I don't listen to them very much. I don't know if they're vinyl people. I say if you're not going to pick your CD off the shelf, why would you go spend $30 or $40 on a vinyl? You know what I mean? It's people to even in that Tooth and Nail group that I'm in, it's just people to have it. Like, it's people older like us or whatever, where they're like, oh, I like that. And, I have probably 5 or 6 unopened vinyls on my shelf. So it's kind of just to have it sometimes, I think. Do you have anything I've put out? It's okay if you don't. I won't be hurt. I don't probably have anything you put out. I just, any of the MXPX recent stuff? No. Got it. Because to be honest, I don't really see it that often. Like when I saw that one, only for sale by them. Like that's the other thing. Yeah. Like I said, I will put myself into record stores eventually, but I won't. I've done everything through the bands, for sale by the bands. And that's one of the things. Like I noticed, like when I saw the Mike Herrera thing the other day, I was like, oh, dude, what? And he's done some re-releases. Oh, dude, I'm definitely into this and looking into getting some. But like it's just kind of, you don't see it very often. Yeah. Again, because I feel like you get in your mind who your audience is. You know exactly what they want, what they're shopping for. You know exactly how to approach them. and you cultivate that audience over time. This isn't
Yeah.
this isn't something I just invented overnight. You know what I mean? It's something that I've been pounding at for 10 plus years with tooth and nail. Hey, I got to do your artwork. Your artwork sucks. Your packaging sucks. Let me get in the weeds with you guys and do it for you and show you and proof of concept. And I heard no forever.
Yeah.
The thing about me is that I don't really care if you tell me no, because I'm going to ask again. And then if I get a no and you give me a reason why, then I can start to fine tune what my ask is according to your no. Does that make sense? I do that in business all the time.
Definitely makes sense, because I'm trying to get people on the podcast. Sometimes I get a lot of either ignored or no's. So it's kind of, definitely.
What do you, and you have to, like, if you can get them to answer a couple questions, like, what are you looking for my podcast to be? What would you like to be asked that you're not getting asked by other people? You know what I mean? What subject are you feeling like you need some collaboration creatively on? Because most people think a podcast is about, okay, this guy, this host for this podcast, he's got his agenda. He's going to drill me with 10 questions. It doesn't have to be that way at all.
No.
It can be
I like
back
it having
and
a conversation, to be honest. Almost the Joe Rogan kind of idea of having a podcast. And the idea behind mine is kind of like, I want to interview people that, have been in the industry or are currently in the industry that maybe could help me figure out what I need to do. Like two of the people that I kind of sent emails to a couple of different times now are the Clark brothers and Brandon from Dead Poetic. So, because they both do friggin' amazing artwork. So I was like, you know what? I want to get these guys on the album and say, like, or on the podcast and say, what do I need to be preparing for all this stuff? What are some of the things that I need, that people maybe don't understand about artwork,
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to get a hold of those guys.
Yeah. They don't do podcasts really.
No.
Rarely.
I've seen Brandon do a couple, but I haven't. Yeah, the other guys, they don't seem to do anything else. So
yeah. And even Brandon's podcast that he's done with people that he's well acquainted with, he's very, very close to the best on everything. If you've noticed that, even his labeled podcasts and stuff like that, it was very close to the chest. And it's some people just really enjoy doing the work only. They're not in it for the recognition. They're not in it for the social media, again, some people are so deep in it. They're like, if that happens, if that comes my way over the course of time, so be it. But I'm far too busy to think about whether or not it's happening and care about it. And maybe when I'm sitting at the fireplace at 80 years old on Christmas night, and I look back on my life, I'm going to have this like dawning on me moment, like, wow, I made an impact. I really did something for people. But it ain't happening when they're 45 or 32 or 64. They're just too busy working.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Well, artists too, I think a lot of them are introverts, even though as much as they're like, the front people of the band or whatever, a lot of them are just introverts, like maybe sometimes don't like being out there, even though they are out there.
Yeah. And my job is to draw those things out of people. That's literally all I do for a living, is to draw that stuff out of the most introverted or the most outgoing or whatever, and just match the speed, like find the speed. Or sometimes you have to set a tone, like, that labeled podcast, it was like, I made deliberate choices about how I approached that conversation and the way that I took the tone to it. It was very academic. It was almost scholarly. It was almost more subdued than you and I are being for a reason. It was strategic, like I knew that I was the audience of a labeled podcast, but I was also not going to be of much interest to most people. So I'm going to set the tone right away. I know how to set a tone and say, I'm the guy who will present you with a lot of information, and you'll either love it or you'll be like, this is garbage. Turn this off.
No, I loved it, dude. I listened to every second of it.
That's totally fine. I don't care. Turn it off. Do something else with your time. Find something better to do. That's fine. It's not going to slow me down one way or another. So I would say the advice I would give to you is don't take umbrage. Don't take offense. Have thick skin about who you're approaching and how many times you get rejected, because for every 20 people you reach out to, one might get back to you. And that one conversation might be enough to make the other guy who said no to you 3 times already come around. Do you know how many times Brandon Ebel said no to me? I can't count it. I mean, look at how many records are on here and then triple it. That's fine. That's fine. I said, well, then I'll do the work and I'll prove to you that I'm right. And eventually I did. And that's fine.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, dude,
Hey,
thanks so much for coming on, man, and spending some time with me. I know you're busy and whatnot, and I slept in a little bit, so
It's all good, man. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Great talking to you. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Good
You
luck
too,
with your
dude.
podcast.
Thanks. Appreciate it.